Hello. Well, we're going to be reading a few Swedish legends and folktales about dying. So you're going to see pictures of that country in the background while I talk. I guess it's the foreground because there's nothing else in front of it. Anyway, here's some lore about the Black Death. The Great Plague, or Black Death, was particularly fierce in Vanga. The ones who got the disease had a cross on their fists, but whether it was black or red, I don't know. They also sneezed in a funny way. Then the others said, "Bless you." The ones who were sneezing started to dig their own graves and would sit on the edge. After they had sneezed a third time, they would tumble into the grave, and then the survivors would cover them over. We have a little bit of background information here. Sneezing, of course, you do that when you're sick. It's a symptom of being sick, and during the plague, we can well imagine that people associated it with that. That's one thing, but what's this business about digging your own grave? Quote, "The point of digging one's own grave was to be certain that one would be buried in hallowed ground. And there is evidence that plague victims took themselves off to the graveyard at the first sign of the disease." End quote. Here's another about the plague. It's called The Survivors. Sometimes these stories have titles, sometimes they don't. I don't think the titles are even original when there is one. I think the folklorist collecting the tale gave it one. Or, the first person to actually write it down, etc. But this one's an appropriate title because it is about death and yet survival. When the Black Death was going around, the cause of it was that a strange animal was wandering around the countryside. No one had ever seen it before. Wherever that animal went, people turned black, fell down, and died. There were only 2 survivors, and they lived far to the south. They were a boy and girl, both unmarried. They were supposed to go up on a mountain and yell and shout. Then one answered the other. And so there was a place called Ruffelt, and one called Svarholt. Okay, now a little information about that. The story is a template that's seen throughout Europe, not just in Scandinavia, where there's just 2 survivors and they repopulate, the country or region, whatever. The 2 peculiarities about this version of it, though, this one from Sweden, are 1, the mysterious animal that's causing all of this, and we don't even get a description. And then notice when it comes to the young man and the young woman, we don't get their names, but we get these names of places that are named after the event of their fateful meeting. So I'm sure I butchered the pronunciations, but Ruffalt is Shoutwood, and Svarholt is Answerwood. So kind of like calling out from a mountaintop and hearing your echo. Pretty neat then from a local folklore standpoint. People, I guess, would say, well, this is the very spot where the boy called out, and from over there is where the girl's voice responded. Kind of like being able to walk up to the spot of the Garden of Eden for your own localities, Adam and Eve. Here's another one. It's set in a church out in the country, so I found an image appropriate to that, and you might find it of interest that I found an actual picture of that spot and a piece of artwork based on it, both quite old. Near the church at Bro, there are a couple of unusual stones. 2 women were disputing with the church about a piece of land that had been given to it. When the time came to decide the case on the spot of the disputed land, the women put dirt from their own fields into their shoes and swore oaths that they were standing on their own earth. But no sooner had the false oath passed their lips than their bodies were turned into the 2 stones which still stand by the church. And people say the crime was that much worse because one of the women was pregnant, as can clearly be seen from one of the stones. And so again, we have a local landscape feature or features explained with a tale. There was a childbearing note in that last story, so let's keep with that theme. This story is called 12 Children on a Platter. Whatever a person has to go through, he has to go through. She found out about that girl who wouldn't get married before she was 50 in order to avoid bearing children. She got 12 at once. That was because she would have had that many if she had married and got what she was supposed to get. All 12 looked dead, but they put them on a platter and put the platter in the oven. And when it was good and hot, one of them came to life and began to move. And that child lived and grew to be full grown, they say. Pointed out when this story was originally collected that the baking, children or babies in the oven and platter device seems borrowed from common changeling stories, because what often happens in those is the woman is about to put the baby in the oven on a platter, and that's when the true mother shows up and reclaims her child. Here's one more. The Piece of Straw. Once an old woman with second sight came to a certain place. The family there had a young boy, and when she saw him, she said, "That's a nice boy, but he will kill a man." After that, they were all afraid, but the boy grew up and was extremely gentle. But once, someone came and wanted to fight with him, and no matter how he defended himself, the other would never leave him in peace. Then someone suggested, "Hit him with a piece of straw." He did, and the other fell down dead. You see, it couldn't be any other way. He had to kill someone. Well, the visual that you're looking at here is, of course, well, I think a lot of you will get it immediately, is from Scandinavian myth, and it's Loki successfully scheming to have Balder killed. And of course, that wasn't with a piece of straw, it was with mistletoe, but it's been posited that there's a link between that story and the folktale that we just read. Or at least that famous template filtered down to this much, smaller story, because there are variations on it. For instance, there's a story from one of the sagas in this part of the world where a group of warriors have to draw lots to determine who's going to be sacrificed, but it's a kind of a false sacrifice, a faux sacrifice. So a facsimile noose is fashioned, one that won't actually choke you, and then one of the warriors, not the one being quote-unquote sacrificed, has a reed. So right at the moment of the false sacrifice, the noose turns into an actual rope noose, and the reed becomes a spear, which impales the victim. Another instance of this template that's pointed out for us is from Finland, where Lemminkainen is killed by a reed that's hurled by a blind shepherd, so obvious similarity to the story of Balder, where it's his blind brother who shoots the fatal missile. And now, though, for a surprise, we get to go back to Sweden, where we are told there was once a custom where someone who was suffering greatly was struck with a piece of straw to put them out of their misery. So obviously a piece of straw can't literally put you out of your misery, but this seems to be a ritual reenactment of the stories we were just talking about. Fascinating, so it was hoped that, reenacting it, executing on that ritual would actually lead to a death. And that is it. This video was made specifically for Joseph Miller. Really appreciate your generous support in getting Death and Global Folktales made. I am slaving over the e-version now, because I'm going to produce that one myself. With a little bit of help, and I'm just waiting for my proof copy to arrive so we can move forward with the paper edition. And thanks again. Bye.